So, hey, Mike, thanks for suggesting this, man. This is great that you can take your time to gather other CFIs and all kinds of DPEs to have some fun together. So thanks for suggesting this.
I think that we probably owe it to Michael McDonald because it was his head I went in to get the idea.
That's true. That is true. Yeah, you guys were like right on the same page for sure.
Thanks for crediting a little credit there, Mike. Appreciate that.
Anytime, anytime.
You beat me by that much, I think. It's not a competition.
Well, so Mike, do you want to kind of start, like, give us your thoughts as far as the topics we wanted to you wanted to touch on tonight with other qualified individuals, plus maybe, you know, at the end we can talk about what Thursday could look like as well. You want to kind of dive into that?
Well, Gabe and I were talking earlier, and we think that probably the best way to approach this topic, ask a CFI, ask a DPE, with the number of people that are going to be participating or that we think will participate, is to break it down into 2 sessions like we did tonight and Thursday night. Tonight, if we could try to keep the questions on the private, commercial, and I'll even throw out their CFI level, then everybody can participate that's here because the answers will be relevant to everybody. And Thursday night, we'll focus on the instrument side of the house. That way, student pilots that aren't working on instrument ratings right now and wouldn't necessarily understand what we're talking about wouldn't feel left out. They're welcome to participate, but they don't have to listen to questions that would have no relevance to them whatsoever. So that's kind of where I think we're going. I know I'm here, Mark Loudermilk and John Somiak are also on board. They're designated pilot examiners. Michael McDonald is a ground instructor, so he can provide input and help out with questions as well. Do we have any other CFIs?
Barry, you're a CFI?
That's correct.
Mike, can I make just one suggestion to your idea? Why don't you do a little bit of a roll call and see what the audience really is in terms of who's working on what level certificates, so we can really focus on the questions that and the subjects that are most of interest to them. You're muted, Mike.
That's a good idea. We can certainly do that, Mark. Let's see. I'll just go right down the list. I'm looking at the participant list on the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to start with Ahmed. What would you like to talk about here tonight?
I like to talk about crosswind. That's
okay.
I have a question. I was during the training on round dials, I always had a problem figuring out where the wind coming from. You know, with the G1000, it tells you where the wind is coming from. But so there is a mental trick where you're actually hitting 90 and the wind coming 310. Can you tell it coming from right or left?
That's a great question. And I also, you'll have to pardon me if you hear me coughing, it's allergies. I got with an allergist on Monday. Hopefully they haven't shut down for the virus, and I'll get something taken care of.
Ahmed.
Mike, that's what everybody says. Everybody says it's just allergies.
Hey, Ahmed, what level certificate are you working on?
I have an instrument rating already, so
you're a private instrument.
Yes.
Okay. Are you looking forward to getting a commercial?
No.
Okay. All right.
So I'm just doing for recreation. I'm not doing it for anything else.
Okay, that's good. There's no harm, no foul with that. Next.
So you got my question, Mike?
Well, I got you. We can answer your question. I'm sure that's, I guess.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do it, Mike.
One of the things I do is I look out of the window and I look at what direction the aircraft is being blown. I look at the ground track, whether I have to crab or not into the wind. With GPS installed, it's easy to determine where the wind is coming from because you just watch your ground speed. And that's an easy way to determine where the wind is. Your fastest ground speed means you have a tailwind. The slowest ground speed means you have a headwind. If it's a crosswind from off of one of your wings, it's just which way the aircraft tends to be drifting across the ground. And I find it very easy and intuitive just to do it by looking outside and watching how fast the trees go by.
Another way, Ahmed, is just remember the numbers get bigger if you go to the right, and the numbers get smaller if you go to the left.
Yep.
So if you're taking off on runway 35 and the wind is 310, you don't even have to do any math. That number is smaller than 350. You know it's coming from your left.
Very left.
How many degrees it is can take a larger significance the higher the wind is, but anything less than 10 or 12 knots, it really doesn't make that much a difference. The correction is going to be nominal to maintain center line and maintain the flight path, but if you got an HSI or even a DG, just look at your heading and whatever the report number is, look and find that number and keep that reference in mind as you fly through the pattern.
Thank you.
And also, this is John, while you're on the ground, you get the AWOS or the ATIS. If you have a heading bug, use it. That always keeps you honest on where the wind is. Set the bug on the wind. You're on takeoff, you know where its relative position is. And also, if you're going to stay in the pattern, you always know where its relative position is.
Thank you very much.
How about if you're traveling further? So if you're not close to an airport?
Give me an example, Cammie.
I was thinking sometimes people really fly all the planes that don't have heading bugs at all whatsoever, just basic. How they can except listening to just closest airport or something, except looking for smoke. But if you don't have any smoke, then
a really easy one before the flight is to look at something like windy.com. If you haven't seen that site, it's kind of amazing what they've done there, but it will show you graphically what the wind looks like. And chances are good, if there's not a front coming through, it's going to be a similar wind direction and velocity, throughout a pretty big area. But that's a good way to visualize kind of what's going on and where things are changing. Doesn't help you in flight, of course.
Well, and if you jot down the winds aloft before you go on your new board, you can have a reference to where they should be, and then you can verify that by, as Mark and Mike said, look outside and see which way you're drifting.
Really, if you're flying IFR flying, you should always be looking outside and observing the flight path. And if the airplane is sliding one side or the other instead of where you're going, you're probably intuitively and instinctively going to apply some sort of correction. The problem is you kind of roll into it thinking that's fixed it, and then you roll out. And what you're not doing is picking a new heading, which gives you a crab angle. And aside from looking outside and seeing when you've selected the correct heading to stop that drift, there is no monkey math or secret to doing this. It's really somewhat of a trial and error approach. Even if you're IFR in the clouds, it's still kind of trial and error, because you get a winds aloft report for a cross-country flight from Leesburg to, say, Charleston, West Virginia, and the winds can be off as much as 30 or 40 degrees from what is forecast. And,
Sure.
And you've got to learn how to judge how much correction do I need to actually make to keep that needle centered, or how much correction do I have to make to keep the flight path going over the landmarks I picked. And it's very much a trial and error system, and it's always going to be changing because the winds are changing. So there's no hard and fast answer to making this happen. You just you got to become a little more intuitive about this stuff. And I think that's the part that's being glossed over in flight training about airmanship and recognition and airplane handling skills and such. So that's my biggest recommendation right there. I mean, when I learned to fly, we didn't have all that stuff. We had an ADF. I had a single NavCom with a glide slope receiver, a single OBS, and an ADF. And I did intersection holds at Ryder intersection on windy days. And trust me, it takes a lot of mental capacity to keep the airplane where you want to keep it. But you know, I've had no GPS, no moving map, and
Some chickens if you want to eat them.
it takes a lot of work
There's
at
some
it
chickens from the grill if you want to eat them.
to keep the airplane where you want to keep it. But you know, I've had no GPS, no moving map, and
Some chickens if you want to eat them.
it takes a lot of work at it.
Did anybody, I had to take a phone call. Did anybody mention how you keep two points in line, and if you see one of them drift off, then you know you can figure out which way you're drifting and by how much? Okay.
No, but that's a good idea for VFR.
Yeah, you pick something a few miles ahead of you and then maybe further out twice as far, and you keep those two lined up. And if you're my eyeballs and the middle one or one of them starts to go off, well, then you know which way you've drifted. So you want to keep everything, your eyeball and those 2 points in line. And that way you know you're going direct rather than homing, which has a curved path.
Oh, that's a good one, Mike.
And can I also make a suggestion? If you're not speaking, maybe hit the mute, because occasionally we hear cooking noises or a noise in the background and such. So if you're not speaking, don't plan to speak for a little bit, maybe hit the mute button as I'm going to do.
Mike, that being said, I want whoever has that chicken on the grill, though.
Yeah, I've been trying to watch the microphones here, so if it does happen, not a problem.
Ahmed, does that help?
Yes, sir. It's really good. A lot of tricks, but really help. Thank you very much. Mike, you need to unmute.
I'll figure it out one of these days. I think the best trick overall that we're saying for VFR type of flying, which we're kind of talking about tonight, is look outside of the airplane, and the answers are right there off out of your windscreen, right off the nose of the airplane, most probably 90% of the time. Easiest way to do it. Who else has? I'll just go. Who else has a question? And since you may not be familiar with Zoom, down at the bottom of your screen there is a there's a chat box. If you open it up, it does allow you to raise your hand, and then one of us will see it, and we can call if you have a question for us. That might keep a little bit of order in the room as well.
Yep, and you can also, just so you know, send me a message individually or someone else individually as well. So versus on the group.
For the iPad, it may be in the upper right under more.
So who else has a question? I see somebody on iPhone that has a question they'd like to ask the room.
Well, I have a question. I'm one of those rusty pilots just getting back into it. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you just fine.
And, you know, I fly usually altitude between 3,000 and 6,000. I rarely go higher and rarely go lower than that. And I have a problem with figuring out the days that there are no turbulence. So, you know, the wind can be calm and all that. And it's just like, you know, banging all over the place once I get up to 4,500, even if I try other altitudes. And then some days where it's just, there's strong winds and all that, but it's smooth as glass. So is there a way or a trick to figure out calm days at altitude that would be helpful? Because sometimes I try to fly with friends and family, and it's just terrible when it's turbulent. any help will be appreciated.
That's a great question. One of the things I like to do, and then I'm going to let John Somiak talk about some of his tricks because he's a weather genius for in the group here. But I like to go to aviationweather.gov. I like to pull up the satellite image for the Baltimore area, and I look for striations in the cloud patterns. If I see striations, and a striation is the washboard effect you can see in the clouds, that's a pretty good indication that you're going to have some bumps when you're flying around out here through the Blue Ridge and the mountains in the area. It's an easy way to see them. It's usually very accurate, unless it's a super clear day with no moisture in the atmosphere. Then I look at pilot reports. But I'm going to turn it over to John Somiak now for his input.
No, good call, Mike. Seeing what the atmosphere is really doing from the visual pictures is good. Always knowing what's making the weather. So looking at your prog charts to know, am I going to be flying through a frontal system? Am I flying into a low pressure system? Is the weather going to change? And that's going to give you a feel for what's making the weather that could contribute to turbulent action. And then obviously the PIREPs, real-time reports, not generated by the computer, will give you fairly timely reports. And then also the advisories, your airmets, low altitude, turbulence, and that's a forecast. It's not entirely accurate, but it's pretty close. Those are probably some of your best guidelines, at least for now. Mark?
Okay.
Unmute, Mark.
Yeah. Hey, iPhone, tell us your name.
Pierre.
Pierre. When you're going flying, how far are you traveling? 50 miles, 100 miles, or is it just local stuff?
Yeah, a bunch of local stuff, and sometime I do the 50 or 100 miles, but nothing further than that. So I'm usually in the area, just going up here, you know, from Leesburg, you know, Winchester, Cumberland sometime, but just the basic around, you know, Luray and Charlottesville and things like that.
Okay, so here's my suggestion, because I spend a lot of time at those altitudes in the Navajo. And when you look at your winds aloft, they go every 3,000 feet, 3, 6, 9. And if there's between those three levels, if there's more than 50 degrees change in the direction of the wind, or there's more than 20 knots in speed difference between the different levels, you could probably expect that there may be some turbulence there. Especially if you're going east or west over the mountains, because the closer the winds to the surface are, those mountains are just like the bottom of a stream. And the air is a liquid, just like water, and it's flowing over it and it's following the contours of the earth. And in those kinds of conditions, you can expect to get some turbulence, and that's caused by wind. In the summertime, when there's not a lot of wind, you're going to get a lot of this convective stuff, and there's no way to predict how much or what it's going to be. But in the summertime, this uneven heating of the earth is really, really prevalent, and that's when you get the ups and down bumps. And you know, sometimes it can be smooth as silk, and other times it's, you know, it's a bit unbearable. I remember flying when I was flying for Eastern. We'd come out of DC in a 727, and we'd get mountain wave effect off the Appalachians here at 18,000 feet. So you're not immune to it. And the only problem I see with PIREPs is that in the summertime and VFR conditions, you really don't see a lot of guys giving PIREPs. And so if you see a PIREP, make sure you make a note of what the altitude and the type of aircraft is that it was that made that. If it's a 737 at 23,000 feet, it's probably not going to be that helpful to you, because they're experiencing something different than you would be experiencing. Does that help?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I need to pay attention to the charts and the pi reps. I don't get too many around here, so yeah. Okay.
One of the charts that is useful for this, and they don't teach it so much in aviation, but the skew-T diagram will tell you a couple of things. One, it's going to show you winds, and it's going to make it real obvious graphically if there's large wind shifts at particular altitudes. The other, drops rate, and that's going to give you an indication of stability of the air. So it takes a little bit of time to unmute it.
Somebody needs to mute their
Somebody,
iPad. Or,
yeah, somebody take a look at their mic here.
Larry, if you could mute.
Get the dish hopper with
Trying to find
price guarantee at good vibes.
Larry, iPad 3.
Yeah.
If you could mute.
I got it. There we go. You're good.
All right. So that chart is a little bit of effort to understand how to interpret it. It's a chart that's mostly used by meteorologists, but if you can figure out those kind of things, the wind is pretty easy to figure out. Figuring out the lapse rate and the temperature shift over altitude, it takes a little bit of digging into it, but the skew-T diagram is the one to look at for that.
I'm going to shill for a particular iPad app that I've been using for a long time. I really like it because it's a simple format. It's easily configurable, easily changed. And it's called AirWX, AIRWX. It's they have a little bit of a subscription. I think it's like $6.95 a year, and it will download some approach plates and things like that. I don't use it for that, but you can set up airports as identifiers, and it gives you a little symbol. It'll tell you whether it's VFR or IFR, low IFR, marginal VFR, give you a wind arrow and tell you what the wind direction and speed is. And then if you just tap on it, it will give you the METAR for that airport, how old it is, and on the bottom there's arrows. You can go right or left. It gives you the AWOS and forecast information, the FA and or TAF, I'm sorry, and it will do it in plain English or it will do it in aviation language. And you tap it again and it'll give you pi reps, and it gives them on a map with a red dot, and you can just tap the dot and it'll pop up the pi rep and tell you what it is. I use it a lot for like the night before flight planning, and even during the day if I'm out on a trip and I just want something quick about some airports along my route of flight. I can do it very easily, and it's just dirt cheap, and it works good, lasts long. So it's something you may want to consider.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you for the info.
Did I see Tracy raise a hand?
I don't see another hand raised just yet, unless I'm missing it.
No, I see her there. You're muted, Tracy.
Yeah, Tracy, yeah.
No audio.
Your microphone, Tracy. Your lips are moving, but we can't hear you.
Unmute. Oh, never mind. 1 second. She keeps moving around. Yeah, you're not on mute, but I think, yeah, she was having an issue just a second ago on Facebook Live. So Tracy, if you want to type that into Facebook Live, I can mention it here.
Good.
And while she's doing it, I do have a message from Eric Fine. He has posted that he's an aerospace medical doctor, civilian, former military, and an also an urgent care doctor. He says if there's any COVID questions that anybody has, he can field them if you would like to ask. He also said, this I'll direct to John and Mark. He's a 500-hour private pilot, instrument rated, and he wants to know what the big gotchas are on the commercial check ride.
Mark, you want to go first? You're muted. There you go.
No, I'll let you go first, John.
Well, okay. In the oral part, I am still seeing on a number of folks, not quite the commercial level of aircraft system knowledge. For a commercial, you better be very in-depth on describing how the airplane you bring works. Fuel system, electrical system, if it's a retractable, how the landing gear works, and the anomalies that can occur with any of those systems, the emergencies. That, if someone's going to pay you money to be their commercial pilot, you need to know how that airplane works and how to handle issues. So that's a bugaboo I see. And then knowledge of aerodynamics well above what you had at the private level. More about how airplanes turn and adverse yaw and much deeper in aerodynamics. Those are probably the first couple big ones that I see.
Thank you.
And probably weather as well too. More depth in weather, maybe.
Yes, ma'am.
And the commercial pilot, you might be going much farther than you usually go as a private. And you're taking people away to wherever they want to go. So might be far out.
That's true. On any certificate or rating, I could always ask for a little bit more knowledge on weather. Weather has been a deficiency area for some time now. And I think it's largely owed to perhaps the instructors not diving deep enough into it or know enough about it themselves.
So my answer of look where the fronts are, don't fly through them is not sufficient, probably.
That's a start. Don't head into the middle of the low, please.
You know, I give somebody in advance of the test, I give them an email that explains a lot about the test and what they need to do to prepare. And I give them a cross-country planning assignment. I give them information for weight and balance and performance problems. And that cross-country is the scenario for asking questions. And it usually starts with something like you work for a flight school. They've got a broken aircraft someplace, wherever you pick to go 150 nautical miles away. You got to take you and a part to go. And is that charter? Is it not charter? And guys are still weak on what privileges a commercial pilot can actually exercise. What constitutes holding out. You may not think it's a big issue, but the FAA is really starting to crack down on that kind of stuff. And they're really looking seriously at the guy that says, hey, I want to take flying lessons, but I want, every week I want you to give me a lesson going from point A to point B because I got business there. That's become a real issue for NATA and the FAA. So you need to be familiar with what's really legal for you to do. The flight itself, I see real problems in understanding what weight and balance is. They can do the calculation, but they don't understand the implications of how an airplane is going to handle when the weight and balance is at the very aft limit versus what it's going to handle like at the very forward limit. And I get answers like, well, it's going to stall 2 knots faster. That's the textbook answer out of the Cessna stall speed guide, but that's not the answer. The answer is, if it's aft, it's going to be very easy to over rotate the aircraft on takeoff or on landing and do tail strike damage to the aircraft. If it's at the forward limit, you may not have enough elevator control to rotate the aircraft for takeoff or in the flare. Handling, that's back to John's comment about aerodynamics and what are the aerodynamics and how it affects the airplane and what does the tail surface really do. Questions like that. And I do see some issues with systems problems, but since we got to the point where everyone's bringing a 172, it's really hard to ask some in-depth systems questions to it. But I'm always amazed when I ask the question, hey, what's it mean when the little red light comes on up here? And they don't know the answer. How do you fix it? Can you fix it? Things like that. So, and airspace is still a big issue for commercial pilots, which is astounding to me because they had to learn airspace as a private. They really had to learn airspace as an instrument. And now here we are as a commercial, and they still can't explain to me why is the Class E airspace 700 feet above the surface over this airport versus some other airport. And so I echo a lot of John's sentiments, but you know, I don't sit there and ask questions out of the ASA test guide. My questions get developed as I go because based on the answer the applicant gives me, that gives me direction on where their weak areas are and where I need to start focusing on to see if they really have the knowledge.
So I'll throw a small commercial that anybody getting ready for a practical test for any certificate or rating, you need to insist from your CFI to get a final stage check. And that usually means another set of eyes, another instructor, a senior instructor, someone else that you're not used to, so that you can get a fresh perspective on the kind of things that can be asked. And that will really help you prepare. People that I test that don't have stage check, it usually doesn't go all that well. So do yourself a favor, get another set of eyes, and do a full mock check ride with someone else.
The other thing the stage check does for the applicant is it forces them to fly with somebody that's not their regular instructor, and their regular instructor is coaching them every minute of the flight. It's really funny when I get in an airplane. I'm sure John experiences the same thing, and the student looks at me and says, "How do you want me to do something?" I how you were instructed. I'm not here to teach you how to do the maneuver. I'm not here to teach you my way of flying. I'm here to evaluate the skills and knowledge that you have, that you've been provided and learned from your instructor. That's what my job is. So they're really astounded when I sit there and give them the deer in the headlight looks. It's like, I want you to do how you were instructed. That's what we're here for. And let me go back to weather for one thing. Weather has been a tremendous issue for pilots at all levels for at least the last 25 years. Since they started consolidating flight service stations, and we don't have flight service stations like we used to have at Leesburg, where we could take them in and introduce them to a briefer, and the briefer then basically did the job of teaching students about weather, not the instructor. So again, with John, I think a lot of instructors are weak in this area also. And it's really not that complicated. I mean, it's in there. We could expect them to bring prog charts with us and surface analysis charts, and you can certainly get all that stuff on an iPad. But I've gotten to the point that I'm happy if they can explain the relationship between a METAR and a TAF. If you can explain the relationship between a METAR and a TAF, you've got about 65, 70% of your weather problem solved.
Hey guys, so I thank you for that, Mark and Eric. To see, was that helpful for you?
Yeah, that's very helpful. With my background, it's kind of, I was expecting to hear, but I just wanted to kind of get it from everybody who's doing it right now.
The flying part's easy.
Yeah, the last time we saw you, Eric, I think was when you met us up on a flyout when we went to Cape May, I think, if I recall.
Yeah, that was about 6 months. A lot of things have changed since then.
Yeah, we need to catch up. So Tracy just messaged me her question for the group, and so it was about if most people go right into their IFR after they get their private. I'm about halfway through my private, and I plan on going into it right away. Just wondering and looking for some advice.
This is Mike. I think the first thing I would recommend you do is go fly and actually have some fun with the airplane. You're working hard to get that certificate. Go use it, have some fun, then come back and start the instrument rating. That's it right there. Just go fly, have some fun. Enjoy it for a little while, then get back into the training mode.
Tracy, if you can hear me, my advice is don't go get into the instrument flying right away. This is going to sound a little flippant, but you need to go out and build your cross-country skills and your confidence and scare yourself and get lost a few times and figure your way out of problems before you start instrument training. At about 100 hours, you should have your 50 hours of PIC cross-country completed. And then, you know, go get 5 hours of attitude flying, find a buddy pilot while you go practice that for 5 hours, go get 5 hours of instrument approach, instrument procedure stuff, get a buddy pilot and practice that with them for a while, and then get the final workup for your rating, the final hours you need, and go practice that a little bit, and then get a final set of eyes, like John said, a stage check with somebody different, and then go take your practical test. Get your instrument written test done quickly. Don't get to the last minute and say, well, I've got everything done, but now I got to go take the test.
I have one more advice based on my experience. Don't switch instructors during training, because that will confuse the hell out of you. That's it.
Very good assessment.
But I would also add, make sure that you can fly with your instructor. Don't settle for an instructor that find the right instructor.
So I'm gonna chime in here. I'm a 500. I got my IFR probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and I had 2 different instructors, and this goes right on his heels. I had one I did not trust, and there's something when you don't trust the person next to you and you go into the clouds for the first time, it is something that's very unnerving. When you get in the clouds with somebody you trust wholeheartedly, it's a completely different experience.
Yeah, you have to have chemistry with them.
Yeah. And there's lots of different ways to fly, and by switching, I hear students say, oh, I want to fly with as many instructors as I can because there's always something to learn from somebody. That's just simply boneheaded. There's lots of different things you can learn, but when you're learning how to do a specific task, you only need to learn one way, and that's that instructor. If you start changing instructors, all you're doing is spending money to learn how this instructor wants you to fly and how your other instructor did everything wrong. And that's a waste of your time and your money.
How about the end, when you're done with your training and you want to see maybe another 2 other opinions or to see how other people, but when you're already done, when you have the knowledge, is that a good time to fly with 2 other instructors time?
After you take the test.
Yeah.
Take the test only? Okay.
Actually, flying with different pilot also helps. I find it actually very interesting flying with different people because every one of them have a different perspective and I learn from them. So believe it or not.
Yeah, and flying with a safety pilot and practicing will cut your dual instruction required down significantly, because you're out there with a safety pilot who's going to keep you from hitting other airplanes while you're practicing and figuring the problems out and making the corrections and it's a self-teaching process. It's like a baby, you can only hold the baby up till he learns to walk, but at some point he's going to have to go off and do it himself. And that's what you're doing when you're doing your solo experience with a safety pilot. It's crucial. And you can split the cost with them and split the time.
Somebody mentioned it here, John or Mark, but in case that wasn't clear, to get the instrument rating, you do have to have 50 hours of cross-country PIC time. And so that is not something you want to build when you're working on the instrument rating. You want to come to the training with that hopefully already done. So I would echo what they said and spend some time flying around. And somebody in the comments said, go do the VA, Virginia Aviation Ambassador Program, get the cross-country hours that way. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and make sure they're 50 nautical miles or greater, or they don't count.
Your instruments under the 141 program, that does include a bit of dual instrument cross-country time and solo cross-country time. So you may want to look at that as well, based on the program you want to get into. I think we're all in agreement. Go out, fly, have some fun when you get that certificate, then think about starting the instrumental later.
Tracy, is that helpful? If you give me a nod over there, I'll make sure that looks good or send another message out there. The other question I'm going to come back to, we got another question from Kira online. I tried to ask Mark directly to repeat the runway 35 with the wind at 310, but I don't think he saw it. Can you have him reiterate his question and answer on that? Back to the wind question, Mark.
Yeah, you know, you're trying to visualize where the wind is coming from and attacking the aircraft. The numbers, if the numbers get smaller, that's coming from your left. If the number is bigger than you're heading, it's coming from your right, all the way around 180 degrees. So all you really need to know is what your heading is. What does your DG say? What direction does it say you're going? And if I'll use this example again, if you're taking off on runway 35 and the ATIS there, or AWOS there at the airport says the wind is 300 at 15 knots, look at the DG. 300 is to the left. It's a smaller number than 350. So you immediately know you're going to have a left crosswind on takeoff. The speed you're not going to be able to accommodate until you actually get in the air. And you know, I don't know how to make it any simpler. And if the number's bigger, or it's to the other side of 360, just look at your DG. It's coming from your right. The DG, if you just practice looking at the DG, and a lot of these, even the simple DGs, have a picture of an airplane on the glass face. That airplane is you. So all you got to do is look at the DG and look at the numbers for the wind, and you've got the picture right there. Now you're starting to build the picture in your head. And later on, when you get an instrument flying, these pictures in the head had better agree with what you're programming into your GPS or your G1000 or whatever it happens to be, where you're going to have problems.
So, so Mark, you just got to thank you, Mark. That's a trick I've never heard of before. So there you go. Thank you.
You're welcome. There's tick marks around the DG too at every 45 degrees. So if you want to know what a 45-degree turn is, just look for the tick marks.
So if you just joined, go ahead, Mike.
Sorry about that. Eric just asked the question, heading bug, takeoff runway or wind? Now, there is some difference of opinion when it comes to this question. I study aircraft accidents because I don't think I'll ever live long enough to recreate all of them that I read about. And one of the things that tends to happen is, especially at airports that have runways that leave from very close to each other, may have runway 26 and 22 with a very close intersection perhaps, or the same starting point at the end of the runway. And I like to set the heading bug to the departure runway. I want to make sure I have enough asphalt underneath me so I can accelerate and take off, as opposed to planning on a 3,000-foot runway and only having 2,000 foot of asphalt ahead of me. And that actually was an actual accident in Lexington, Kentucky, Calm Air many years ago. Other folks like to set it to the wind. They want to know what the crosswind is so they can better prepare for it. So I guess it becomes a personal preference, north up or track up when you set your GPS.
John, go ahead, John.
Oh, I was just going to say that's almost like a religious discussion, so we don't go there.
All right, well, I will go there because I come from a different perspective, because this is what I do as a professional, as a contract pilot and former airline pilot, such like that. We set the heading bug to the runway heading, and we do that from the day you start as a private pilot. Again, if you use the trick of looking at the numbers for the winds, you don't need a heading bug there to remind you of where the wind is coming from. The reason we do that is because it becomes an ingrained habit. And then later on, when you start flying instrument flying, you want the heading bug set to the runway heading, because if anything happens during the takeoff after you're in the clouds, it tells you where to go for the safest obstacle departure procedure, because they're generally always straight out to a certain altitude before you turn on course. And if you have it set to some other, well, I see people turn it to the course that ATC gave them on the takeoff. And the problem with that is, in a more sophisticated aircraft, the moment you turn the autopilot on, that's where that airplane's going to go. And that may not be where they wanted you to go right away. And it may not be the safe direction to go at that altitude. So the heading bug should be in agreement with the direction you want the airplane to go at all times. And it doesn't change until you change your direction. It doesn't lead you. It doesn't follow you, you lead it.
I agree with Mark on that. I mean, once you're airborne, the winds could change. You know, what you have on the surface could be very different from what you have at 500 or 1,000 feet. So what good is that heading bug if it's on the winds just for the surface? At United, we put it VFR, we're going to put it on either runway heading or where ATC says to turn. If it's IFR, then maybe we just put it on runway heading initially. But on the Airbus, it'll set up so it'll just fly runway track anyway if we lose an engine. So I know that's not your case, but if we were planning on going into the clouds, then we might wait until the appropriate altitude or point in time before we turn it to the heading, bug it to the heading that ATC wants us to go to. So I agree with Mark on that. Just set it to the runway heading. You can remember where the winds are coming from. You've got a good memory. You won't forget.
Okay. Memory's faulty, remember that. Mike, the way I have instructed it is, when you're working on your private, initial orientation to flying and wind and cross countries, it's beneficial to have it on the wind. Once you graduate from that, then runway heading is a good way to go. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and just so you know, I've never gigged anybody on a check ride for how they set it up. I may make a recommendation, but I've never gigged anybody for something like that, unless they set it and totally screw things up, and that's a different story.
Hey, Laura, I saw you. It looked like you may have had something to say there. Do you? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, on the heading bug?
Uh-huh.
It should always be in runway heading for takeoff, period.
Well, there you have it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not even, that's not even a question. Just, it's runway heading.
Yeah, but you're airline, right?
I'm airline. But
Well,
I'm also a CFII, and it's runway heading.
Well, you know, so many students come in with the idea anymore that that's where they want to go. So, you know, that's really, if that's where they want to go, that's what we should be teaching, and instead of expecting them to change habits in the middle of their training program. It's really hard to change somebody's habits after they develop a certain amount of skill, knowledge, and proficiency. It's really hard to change that. And Mike and Laura, you fly in the airlines currently, and I know when I was there, you get some guys, and it's really hard to get them to change up on some things, isn't it?
I found everything goes back to primary. Everything goes back to, honestly, your most fundamental instruction, your first year in the airplane, to your private pilot, your basic fundamental stick and rudder skills, and then your instrument skills. It really does all go back to your primary, and you have to learn it right from the beginning, because like you said, it's very hard to undo that, because so much of what you do is just muscle memory and really just habit, and that's the foundation of safety, is good habits. So it's very hard to change those midstream. So yeah, I agree. If you plan to have a career, you should do it the way the airlines do it, because there's a reason why they do things certain ways. It's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, did you see the question from Mike Wolfel about CFI?
I did. I was just going to make sure that we got the question heading bug resolved before I put Mike's question out to the room. And also, thanks for coming, John. It was a pleasure having you tonight. I hope you can join us Thursday.
Yeah, see you later, John.
Mike asked the question, what order should you take the knowledge exams for CFI? I've got an easy answer. Knock out the fundamentals of instruction, the FOI, first. That's typically pretty easy material to study. It's Psychology 101 if you go back to your college freshman years and classes that we've all pretty much had to take. And it's adult learning theory. It's going to be a lot of heady stuff. It's not going to make a lot of sense to you initially until you get that first student in the airplane. You're going to be, oh my goodness, this book is genius. It's that type of document. It's a fairly easy test to study for and to prep for. And once you get that out of the way, then take, I like to recommend studying for the CFI airplane, unless you're a rotorcraft person, then you do CFI rotorcraft, and also do the advanced ground instructor at the same time. The test material comes from the same data bank, and you get 2 certificates for the cost of 1 extra exam. You get your ground instructor and the flight instructor certificate with those 3 tests. For the instrument folks, while I know there really aren't any in here, but to follow that logic, when you take your instrument rating, your instrument knowledge test, and if you think that within 24 months you might have enough hours to qualify for your instrument instructor certificate, it is beneficial to take the instrument instructor and the instrument ground instructor test at the same time you take your instrument written. It's a bit of a gamble because you're gambling that you're going to have your hours and training done to get the instrument instructor within 24 months, which is how long the test is good for. But it all is the same data bank, and it might save you a little bit of extra studying in the future.
I just finished this myself last year. Cammie saw me like every other week because she was proctoring the tests that I was taking. So, but I did the FOI first. I didn't really understand necessarily what was in that book until I went and did the CFI ground school, and we went into it in excruciating detail. And it made a lot more sense at that point, and it really is a genius book, but it's some dry reading. But to pass the knowledge test is not that difficult. But definitely take that advanced ground instructor test as well. The biggest reason for that is it locks in the FOI. You're done with FOI. And even if you, for some reason, waited 24 months after you took that FOI test, you don't have to retake it. Once you get a instructor certificate of any sort, the FOI test is sort of out there, and you don't have to do it again. So I did all 5 tests myself and did them within probably a 2-month period.
I did them all as well, because you learn for one, you just knock all of them out. So I did my AGI as well. But with those, you do have an expiration date on it, but you have to go in those 2 years to the FISDO to have it validated. So they said it doesn't expire. Yes, it doesn't expire if you take it to the FISDO.
Yeah, they can renew it for another 24 count. They can't renew the CFI airplane, but the FOI they can. And I will use this one poor unfortunate soul that I'm helping with this CFI stuff now. If you fail the test, don't hang around and pay money again to take the test in the afternoon. This gentleman took the test, the FOI, scored a 67, went and got lunch, went back and paid his money again and took it again and got a 62 and really couldn't understand why. So if you do fail, anytime you fail any written test, take that test, sit down, go through the PLT codes or the ACS codes, figure out what that area of knowledge is that you're weak in, and go study that area of knowledge. So many students and instructors don't do that. And if you're going to be an instructor, that's going to be your responsibility to work on that kind of stuff with your students. So the best place to get the practice is with your own test. Even if you pass the test, sit down and go do that, because as examiners doing initial CFIs, we have to go through those ACS or PLT codes, code by code, and kind of quiz you on those areas of knowledge that you're supposed to have and see if you've corrected the deficiency. It's problematic because it doesn't tell us really what the question was that you missed, but it shows us where you had weak areas of information. So practice with your own test first.
Now, someone asked on the chat that if you have areas that you've missed, how do we treat them in the practical test? Am I understanding that correctly?
No, that was, well, I don't know. Well, but I threw that in there anyway. I hope it helps.
Okay, well, I'll just throw it in. If you come to a practical test, we are obligated to go through the topic areas that you missed on your knowledge tests. The way I do it is I incorporate it into the scenario that I've given you and that we walk through during the oral. I don't do them at the beginning. I don't do them at the end. I kind of incorporate them as we have our discussion.
Exactly.
And by the way, that's what your instructor should be doing in preparing you for your practical. And it's also what your stage check instructor should be doing for your practical as well. The FAA really, really wants us, the DPEs, to do scenario-based evaluation, and you should be taught and taken through scenario-based situations with your instructor, because that's real life. It's not just recalling rote things. You have to interpret a given situation and make an evaluation.
Now that we're talking about this, can we talk about like all the CFIs should go and do a check ride with one of the DPs? I did one recently with John Somiak, and it really puts you back on the seat, you know, especially if you're a seasoned pilot instructor. It brings you back to, like, you know, being the one actually at the controls and not just there with your arms like this and, you know, telling people you do this, do that. It's very easy, you know, when you're doing that. But, you know, doing partial panel VOR Alpha into Winchester when you have DP sitting right next to you, and maybe put some students in the back so they can see how you get grilled too, you know.
Well, now you know how I feel the other day, JP.
What's that? It's a humbling experience.
Now you know how I felt the other day.
Yeah, no, I did it, and you know, it brings you back. It reminds you, you know, how the student feels, and that's big with the FOIs. You know, sometimes you got to put yourself in their pants, and that way it helps you understand, you know, how you can help them advance further in their training.
We had a good time doing that, JP. I appreciate you wanting to do that. And many of us have offered through the years, I know, Mark, you have, to take instructors up to show them the kind of things that we're looking for, and hopefully not repeating mistakes that other students have made.
Yeah, more importantly, what I got to do that with Tim Fisher, so I got to share some things about how to do some of the tasks in the multi-engine PTS, ACS more safely and efficiently, and I also got the opportunity to screw some things up and see if you could catch the errors, and showing things that we don't want to see. I'd rather show you the things we don't want to see on the test as opposed to the things we do want to see. If I can get the things we don't want to see to stop, then that improves it for everybody. If I just show you what I want you to do for my test, I haven't shared any knowledge of whatsoever. I've just said, if your students do this, they're going to pass. And that's not what this is about. This is about turning out safe, efficient, knowledgeable, and skilled pilots. And that's my approach. Ray DeHaan called me the other day, and he said, you know, I remember when we did our single engine, when I did my single engine ATP with you in that Columbia, and you had me do this approach. And he said, I had to sit there for a minute because I realized the airplane wasn't WAS capable, and I hadn't done a non-WAS type approach for ages. And he said, I had to sit there and figure that stuff out again. So we all get stuck in that situation. I get stuck in it when I go to CAE for recurrent training in some jets. We all get stuck in that situation. It's no shame to get there and say, hey, you know, I really screwed this up, or I don't know what I'm doing, or teach me, or show me something. That's the only way we're all going to get better. We gotta get over our prideful selves and seek the help where we're weak and look after it.
Can we talk about centerline landings and takeoffs?
I believe in taking my half of the runway in the middle.
Well,
if it's really windy and the mains are straddling the center line, I call that a success, whether the nose is on it or not. But as we move up with the ratings, we do need to get on that center line, because there's a lot of runways out there. Front Royal's fairly narrow. Clearview's nice and narrow, and there's several other runways in the area that are about 20 feet wide. So center line should be your goal. And if you're not on center line when you're landing, ask yourself, how can you improve your landings to make it center line next time? Mark, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. To add to that, if you go to the ACS, private, commercial, ATP, CFI comes from the ACS, standards come from the ACS. If the main mounts are not straddling a center line, that's not meeting the standards. And I still have students that, you know, both main mounts are one side or the other of the center line, and I haven't really started gigging them hard for that, but you know, it's going to start happening. I'm sure you've seen the same thing, John.
Yeah, I have. And for the reason, if you have to make an emergency landing at that 40-foot wide runway, we want you to do it in the center, and we don't want you in the grass. Be your own worst critic on center lines at all times.
And in all fairness, the reality is we never know if we're going to have a tube get pinched and pop on a landing or not. And you want as much runway on either side of the mains as you can get in case you do have a tire that does go flat on landing.
Yeah,
that gives a little bit of room to stop the aircraft without hitting the grass.
And this subject circles right back around to Ahmed's very first question about knowing where the wind is coming from and assessing it and how to correct for it. That's the most basic principle right there, wind correction on takeoff and landing. So Ahmed, I'm glad you brought that up as the very first question this evening.
You're very welcome.
Who else has a question that they'd like to ask tonight?
I have a question about how to do the CFI training, since I'm right at that point. And they have all these accelerated schools when you are done in 10 days. Are those any good, or is any where I can do it in Leesburg? I started with Aviation Adventures, but now since it's closed, I feel like I have to wait and I don't know how long. And what's the best way to do your CFI training, basically?
I'll tell you how I did mine, just because it was recent. I did it in December. I looked at Aviation Adventure. I talked to Bob there, and he really wanted me to do the 141 program, which didn't work that well for me. I travel too much for work, and I have an unpredictable schedule. So I went to a guy called CFI Boot Camp is the name of the program. It's a guy who used to be an examiner out in California who did a lot of my check rides when I was living out there. He now does this full time and goes between Florida and California and just does the boot camp there. So it was 2 weeks that I parked myself in an Airbnb in Miami. The first week was 8 hours a day, 6 days straight of classroom and going through just scenarios and endorsements and all the FOI stuff in excruciating detail. we did some flying that week, and then most of the flying was the following week. So I probably did 15 hours of 172 flying from the right seat between that. For me, that really worked really well because I could block out that 2 weeks and say, I'm not doing any work that time. I'm parked in an Airbnb away from home, away from my family. And so all I did was study aviation, and it was silly. I was pacing around in this place, like teaching lessons out loud to myself. But it worked really well for that reason. So I was a fan of the kind of accelerated program, but it's because I could really dedicate full time to it for a couple of weeks. So that's one approach.
I like accelerated program, but I don't have to be necessarily that accelerated. If I can work on it 4 days a week, I'll be fine with it as well. But I feel like 1 time a week or 2 times a week will be too slow.
Well, you have to talk with the flight school that you're going to enter with and see if they have the bandwidth to do that. And that is very important to keep a momentum going. To counter John's point, I have not done any accelerated programs, but I've evaluated some that have. And I think the success for the accelerated programs is extremely tightly tied to how much work you put into it before you show up, and the training and getting all that work done. Some of them I don't give very much credence to, because if you're not prepared, it's way over your head and you're constantly behind. So
I'll agree with that. In my class, there were 10 other people, I think, and a huge number of them I looked at and said, they're not going to get through this.
Yeah.
They hadn't done the preparation, and some of them were just one guy hadn't flown in 2 years, and he wanted to become a CFI. It wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
So talk to the school that you think can meet your needs, if they have the bandwidth and the appropriately experienced instructors, and go with that. Now, right now we're in a very odd position. Some of the schools are closed and will be closed for a little bit.
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll open back up soon, but everybody's in the same boat.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of flying going on right now in terms of instruction.
So what I'm trying to do with this occasion that we're always home, I got a whiteboard from Mo, actually, and I'm teaching my dog, explaining to my dog, and I have a poster. So I'm trying, in all the study materials, I'm trying to read through everything. But then when I find myself trying to explain it, I was like, oh, the words are not really coming, even though I do have it in my mind.
Has anybody, when you go through that training, have you ever recorded yourself and then watched the video back to see how you feel about that? I mean, how does that work? Or does anyone do that?
Yes, I did it. It was very embarrassing to hear yourself back talking.
I don't like my voice.
If you get your dog to learn, then you will be a very successful CFI. But yeah, I mean, I used to go flying. I got checked out on the right seat, and I used to have a tape recorder, digital tape recorder, and just record my entire lesson. And I was talking from the moment I got in the plane till the moment I got out, and teaching myself maneuvers. And then I'll come back and try to understand everything that I was saying. I mean, it was just painful at the beginning. So it really will help you. You will see that sometimes you're going to be flying the plane and you're not talking anymore. And basically your CFI, you better be talking and teaching the whole time. So it helped me a lot. I did it all on my own, and I started with the lesson plans, because if you don't have the basics, like the fundamentals, when you're doing your lesson plans, you start building on that. It's like you take all your building blocks and you start going up. And it was a lot of work, doing your lesson plans. And now you go to the highest level of understanding of everything, so when you have that, when you're able to show correlation, then you're starting to master the topics, and then you can move on. And that's basically what the FISDA was looking for in my oral exam. It was 7 hours, and I'm sure John and Mark do oral exams for CFIs probably just as long, because it's very in detail. I did it with the PTS, and literally the DPE opened the page, started page 1, objectives, all that stuff.
Who did you fly with at the FSDO, JP?
Don, no, Mark Corvo.
Oh, Corvo, Bob Corvo.
Bob Corvo.
Yeah, Bob Corvo. Yeah, he was pretty thorough. Cammie,
Yeah.
let me ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
Do you have any self-imposed deadlines? Do you have like, I want to get this done next week, or?
Not necessarily. I would like to start teaching as soon as possible. My plan was to start teaching probably in the beginning of the summer because I have more time. But I don't really have a deadline, but I don't like dragging things for too long.
Okay.
I don't want to get out of my maneuvers since I finished my commercial in November, and I don't want to get rusty on my maneuvers either.
You're going to be rusty on your maneuvers
Yeah,
regardless, because you're going to be doing them from a seat you're not familiar with.
Okay.
So sit down with a calendar and pick a date, pick a week in the calendar, the last week of May, middle week of June, and work your way back. How much time would you get if you did it twice a week? And figure that out. And then if you can do 3 times a week, you're going to cut that time back even further, but you haven't crowded yourself into a self-imposed deadline. So that's the first thing. You need to have a calendar and somewhat of a plan.
Yes.
Have you downloaded the material from the FAA's website, the Airman Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, the Flight Training Handbook, or those types of things? How to conduct a BFR or an annual flight review. There's lots of other information out there that you should go and download. And then find, like John said, find a school that has the bandwidth that can do 2 days a week. And then once you get started, if you can work it to 3 days a week, I'm sure they can find a way to make that happen. But just like you're talking about making plans of actions for your students you're going to teach, right now you got to work on a plan of action for you on how you're going to learn. And that's going to help you in figuring out how to develop plans of actions for teaching this stuff. When I was teaching, my plans of actions were on the front and back of a 4x6 index card. And I could use it as the brief on the ground. It referred back to the various FAA documents that I used. And on the front, on the other side of it, it was, a little checklist for safety, and then a description of the maneuvers, the objectives, and the outcomes and the standards. And that's all you need to take with you in the airplane to go teach the particular task you're moving. So you take 2 or 3 of those with you with your student every time you're going to go out and do a lesson, and before long you've hit all the 10 items or 13 items that are required for them to have knowledge and skills and abilities in. So I see people talk about building these elaborate plans of action and paying money for plans of actions, and then they show up to the test and they cannot show me how they use it. And I had one CFI candidate who didn't do very well, because when we got to the point of evaluating students' performance before you move to the next maneuver, his answer was always, well, we send them for a stage check. Well, how do you know when it's time to send them for a stage check? Well, we send them for a stage check. And the long story short, he had no concept of how to evaluate the student's performance and whether they're progressing towards the standards or not progressing. And it was not a very good situation. But you remember, you're a unique individual. So what works for you is going to be what works for you. If you go spend a lot of money on this canned material and then you don't implement it, you've just spent a lot of money on material, but you're not going to be an instructor.
Let me put one more footnote in. We are expecting the ACS for the CFI in June. Now that's the last projection we had. I don't know if that's going to be affected by the current public health issues, but if you're going to work on your CFI, keep an eye out on the FAA website where you can get the PTSs and the ACSs, and keep an eye out for the CFI ACS.
Yeah, and if it stretches out, like we did when the ACSs first came out for the private, there was a transition. I think it was a 6-month period where we actually tested based on what document the CFI used to train them to, whether it was the ACS or the PTS. So there'll be some flexibility in that initially when this comes up.
Hey, Michael, I saw your hands up.
I plan to get my CFII back. It expired way back in 1994 because I just taught a little bit and then got hired on with the airlines. So never really used it after that and didn't know that it was a good idea to keep it active at the time. Now I know. But anyway, sometime later this year, I plan to reinitiate that. And my understanding is I just have to do the practical portion. I wonder if somebody can tell me what that, because I'm guessing that in addition to the practical, I'm still going to be asked a lot of questions. Either on the way to the airplane or in the airplane or whatever. So I have no idea because I haven't studied that material in quite some time. So give me an idea, if you would, what I can expect.
Michael, what certificate did you hold?
I've got my ATP. I fly for United, so I've got my. I had single engine land commercial.
Now what was your CFI certificate?
Single engine and single engine land. I did not get my multi.
But you said single engine land and instrument, correct? Instrument
Right.
airplane.
Right.
Okay. Are you considering adding multi-engine to that?
Down the road, yes.
Yeah,
Well,
it reactivates your other ones.
If you work towards adding a multi-engine instructor to that, it would renew everything. Otherwise, you're going to end up taking a practical test regardless. If you look in the ETS for those, there's a table in the appendix section that says if you hold this certificate, these are the tasks you have to complete to reinstate the certificate. And I would tell you to go there and look first, because that's the areas that John and I are going to focus on, because that's the minimum of what's required. But if you do a multi-engine, and you got access to a plane and you wanted to do that, then there's a table for that too. If you're going to add a multi-engine instructor certificate to your current certificate, you get tested on that, and it reinstates the entire certificate with the new privileges and the old privileges. So if you want to call me offline, I'll be happy to talk with you more about it.
That'll be down the road, so I'll contact you through Facebook, if that's okay. And
Yeah.
But it's going to be, that's months in the future. I'm going back to training at United here soon.
Yeah, so whether it's to add a rating or just a reason, get a hold of me through Facebook and we'll hook up to talk about it.
One thing for CFI that I'd like to reiterate that Mark and John said, it makes no sense to go out and spend a great deal of money buying prepackaged lesson plans. Quite often they're not current, they're incomplete. And when I work with people that have them and I say, teach me how to do a maneuver, whether it's how to taxi or how to do it aids on a pylon or what have you, they have no idea what that lesson plan they purchased actually says. It's almost easier to get a template, ask your flight instructor if they have any templates they can provide you, and then go through all of the tasks and subtasks in the private and commercial PTS or ACS and make a lesson plan for ground instruction and for the flight instruction side of it. When it comes to the flight side and the maneuvers, try to keep your lesson plans to about 10 minutes. That's typically all an adult will listen when you're giving them explanation on how to do a maneuver. Ground instruction should be no more than 50 minutes before you take a break. Again, that's about how long psychologists say that we can sit still and pay attention. And you'll find things go, and I'll give you a great example. with the advent of the Airman Certification Standards, the ACS, one of the major things that they changed in that document is each area of operation and each task now has a section on risk management. Previously, in a practical test standard, it was just a bullet under the special emphasis areas. Most of the things you're going to buy or download off the internet do not even discuss risk management. They don't even look at it, but that's a required item now on these check rides. So you'll certainly want to be familiar with the risk management concepts, risks associated with the various maneuvers that you're teaching, and be able to explain that effectively. And at a minimum, you'll have to go back to whatever you purchase and add those sections into the material to have it current and applicable anyway. I think that's it, Mark.
Yeah, and my, if I send you some scanned documents of some of my old stuff, would you be able to post that?
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, we can either do that on Facebook, and we can also, if you wanted to, put it on the discussion board under the training materials on the website. It's up to you,
Yeah.
but we can do that.
However you see fit, both of them would be fine with me. Give me a little bit of time to get that done, and you can maybe call it examples of CFI stuff or so. We'll come up with something. But
okay,
I'm going to have to jump off here. I've really enjoyed this. I think it's been an incredibly valuable meeting. I hope the audience does. It's been valuable for me. I've learned a few things from it. So I plan to be here Thursday night if I'm still invited.
You're always invited. So thank you for taking the time, Mark. I really appreciate it. You'll see the alert come out later tonight or tomorrow. I haven't sent anything out on that just yet, so it'll come through. Thank you.
I'm on Facebook, so if anybody wants to friend me or message me or whatever, you can go find me. I'm there. My picture is only an 8 megapixel picture. It's not very good, but I was really proud of it because that student did a really good job on his multi-engine test. So I'm going to keep it.
There you go.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
All right, folks. Thank
Mark.
you very much for your time and attention. I've enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed talking with you and seeing the faces. And maybe I'll get to fly with you, some of you someday soon.
Sounds good, Mark. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. See you, Mike. See you, John.
Thank you.
See you, JP.
This is John. I just have
Hey,
a couple quick things on the CFI stuff. I don't particularly care if someone has purchased their CFI lesson plans, as long as you know how to use them and you teach from them and you understand the material in there. It's a great start, but it is a start. You can go back and augment it with your own examples. But the other thing is you need to practice teaching, not just to your dog. That's a good start, but pick a friend who's not in aviation, doesn't understand aerodynamics or airplanes, and practice on them. If you can get it across to them, you're probably on the right track. And the last point is when you come for the CFI check ride, be ready to teach any and all of the areas of operations and tasks in the ACS, period. Every one of them. Not just the one that you're asked to prepare a lesson plan for. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on, I have a question about iPads and paper charts and flight plans. I mean, somebody shows up with a brand new Cirrus, you know, with all the whistles and bells and an iPad. What for an instrument check ride, for example? Do you want them to show up with paper charts?
I want them to have the appropriate information to use at all times. So if there's a failure in one of his sources, he's got a backup of some sort.
Okay, so the planes come with jobs. Say he's got jobs on the airplane and on the iPad. That's the backup.
As long as there's backup. If he has no backup, you can almost be assured that something's going to fail on the check ride, and you're going to have to deal with that. The FAA does not mandate that you have to have paper on board. They made that clear about 2 years ago.
Okay.
Battery backup for the iPad, a backup iPad. If it's built into your panel, have a backup for that. But we don't mandate how you bring the information in.
Okay. So you will say that a private pilot is going for a check ride, and you give him a flight plan, and he shows up with the flight plan on his iPad, and then he puts the flight plan on the MFD, on the flight plan page for the Garmin. Would that become now the primary in the iPad, the backup?
Well, private's a little different. We need to make sure that they know the basic skills of how to plot a course and make the proper corrections and build a nav log. So the private's probably the exception that we would want to see a nav log, use a sectional, plot it on the sectional, and then if they want to use the iPad as augmentation or for planning, that's okay too. But after private, using the iPad as an electronic flight book, EFB, as primary is generally pretty suitable, at least for me.
Okay.
Hey, Ryan, you mentioned you had your hand up, Ryan.
Yeah, I had some questions in mind earlier. I think I want to shift directions a bit. I'm kind of at the other end of the spectrum. Going for private, 49 hours in, about 30 days past solo right now. So 4.6 hours past solo. We just got shut down. Some of this I wish I'd heard earlier because I used 2 instructors for a while. That's an interesting hearing things earlier. Boy, that I have some thoughts on that later on. But I didn't get to fly at all in January because of weather and scheduling conflicts, and I really felt I got setbacks. So was wondering what, we're in uncharted territory here with the health crisis. If I'm out of a plane for a month or 6 weeks, or God forbid 2 months, what kinds of things as a student would you recommend besides maybe planning navigation logs at home and chair flying, etc.? What kind of hits and tricks would you offer up to deal with these strange times?
Finish your ground school, get with your instructor, and get your knowledge tests knocked out as soon as you can. And I say that realizing that the PSI testing centers are currently closed due to the coronavirus as well.
Yeah, well, I got lucky. I'll interrupt you. I knocked, this is my second go around. I did ground school in college. I did self-study this time, passed the test a week ago Saturday, just ahead of getting shut down. So that was good, just lucky timing.
Well, okay, good. I would work on flight plans, plan on where you would want to go for your cross countries, and just keep studying and chair fly.
Do you think, does it make any sense to continue working through some of the knowledge questions? Like I used Sporties on my iPad, which was terribly cheap, but it turned out to be really helpful on the written. Just keep working through those so I am current for the practical exam. Or some of my friends have recommended, and my CFI gave me a book, and you guys probably know it. I'm fishing it out of my flight bag.
Yep, that's a good book to study.
Yep.
Have you seen the Airman Certification Standard for Private Pilot?
No.
I would recommend that when you get a chance, Google AFS space 630. That's Airman Certification and Training Branch in Oklahoma City for the FAA. All of the documents are available there for free download. And that would be a good thing to download, is that Private Pilot Airman Certification Standard. And that will be very useful for you, so you can see the types of areas and tasks and questions that the DPEs will ask you on your check ride.
Okay, excellent.
Do you have a simulator at home?
Say that again, Ahmed.
Ryan, do you have a simulator at home, like Explain or something?
That's a good question. It's funny you say that because my boss is instrument rated, and I've ridden in the right seat of his Cirrus quite a bit cross country. I do not. He's recommended one. One of my two instructors kind of poo-pooed the idea. I'm actually, it's funny you say that, Ahmed, because I'm working on the final stages on my messy floor here today of getting a better computer together that would probably run a simulator. But I wondered that, although I will say one of the two instructors I used thought for private it was not overly necessary, but I've heard that for instrument it can be very helpful.
True. For an instrument, to be honest with you, I'm using this time right now. I use my simulator to fly to places I've never been.
Yeah.
Like flew yesterday to New Jersey. So, but I think for private, it can keep you familiar with how the controls looks like. But for maneuvers, I don't think it's a good idea.
No.
It's not a good idea for maneuvers. So
no.
So for your private, chair flying is probably your best bet. Do you have a description from the flight school of how to execute all of the maneuvers?
I need to think about that. I'll go through my written documents. If not, I can track you. Surely I can track those down online.
But so if you're going through a flight school, they should have documented procedures on how to execute all of the procedures. If you're going through an independent, then that's a different story. But take those procedures and chair fly, chair fly, chair fly. It helps build muscle memory. It helps your flow processing. That's one of the best things you can do for your private and for any other certificate or rating, by the way.
Okay, good advice.
Would watching videos would help?
If they're the proper ones. I am not an advocate of internet roulette, of looking for the latest whiz-bang guy on the internet.
Okay.
I'm pretty adamant about that. I trust certain tried and true sources, Sporties, King Schools, Gleim.
It's interesting because I started my first flight. Well, it's a weird. I did this in my 20s, and I'm 49 this year. So I came back to this in October. It's kind of like starting all over from scratch. A few things come back. But even just this many months in, I'm thinking, I got the Sporties on video. I need to go back and revisit. It's a snowball of knowledge, and I'm struggling with, what are the beginning stuff that I really need to have down? Have I forgotten along the way already? And let's go back and reinforce that so I have a good base.
Are you doing it on a 6-pack or a G1000 glass cockpit?
A 6-pack and a 172R primarily.
That's probably the only one thing that the simulator will be good for you to, is just to make sure that you know how to use your, for example, if it has some sort of autopilot, or if it has a GPS, just learn how to use those things. But for everything else, I would agree 100% with John. Chair flying, you can put yourself on a 25,000 foot long runway with 5 knots of crosswind, and you can slow it down to as much as you want, or speed it up as much as you want. You can do as many go rounds. You can put yourself downwind every single time. It's probably one of the best things that you can do at home.
It's cheap too.
That's the best part.
If I understood you correct, Ryan, the material you're using is 29 years old from Sporties.
No, all my Sporty stuff is current. I do have my original books, but all the stuff I've gotten from Sporties is the current stuff.
Okay, you may want to also go to that website and download current FAA manuals on the maneuvers and the Airplane Flying Handbook, Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, and just sort of review those as well. That'll keep you engaged with what's going on also. But just make sure that you're using current materials because a lot has changed in the last 29 years.
Oh, they almost laughed when I carried my old Cessna books into the flight school, and they're like, "Well, you obviously can't use them." I was like, "I know, but you know, I got this desperate attempt to cling to my childhood because you know, we did a whole semester of it in college. I took it ground school as a college class, and it was pretty formal, and I just walked away from it from too long."
That's awesome.
I think we have.
Go ahead, Mike. You had a
I
quick
think we
question,
have
Joel.
one more question, and then we can probably wrap this up because we've been going almost.
Yeah, one more.
Now.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's one second there too, Mike. I just want to mention the question that I posted there for you is from Facebook, and then we want to make sure that Mike Woolpole, he raised his hand. Let's make sure we check in with him, and then probably we can wrap from there.
Okay, perfect. We have a question. What is the best way to teach endorsements to CFI applicants? I think what I do is I like to go through part 61 and I actually read the whole part 61. And if you have it digitally, look for the word endorsement as you go through it. I'm a firm believer in keeping a paper copy of the FAR aim. And I put a red dot by every place in part 61 that says there's an endorsement required. Everything from a complex aircraft, tailwheel, spin endorsement for flight instructors, the 3 hours in 2 month requirement, reviewing areas found deficient on knowledge tests. And as you start going through, you're going to see the endorsements cluster based on the certificate or rating that the applicant is going for. Once you get those in part 61 figured out, there's only a handful otherwise that are kind of unique, such as the TSA endorsement, which comes from 1552, which is just kind of an outlier, and you just sort of remember the outliers and make notes of them. And the best tool that you can get is a copy of Advisory Circular 61-65. That has all of the endorsements and recommended language in it that you could possibly ever come across as an instructor.
I would start with 6165 actually and work backwards into the regs from it, because each one of those sample endorsements in the advisor circular has the place that it's referring back into. So that's a good way to also, just so your eyes don't glaze over reading part 61.
Thanks for joining us, Gary. Don't work too hard.
It's not possible right now.
Thanks for joining, brother.
Pretty
We'll
slow.
see you.
Have a good one.
Does that, hopefully that answers your question, Michael, on Facebook. So anyone else on that further? And then Mike Woolpole, we had you, I saw you raise your hand. Yeah, there you are.
Well, yeah, I just had a comment. Basically, I actually did my commercial knowledge test today at Rising Phoenix. They're still doing them for now. I don't know how much longer they're going to do them. You know, I need to get going on the commercial training and knock that out. Like I said, I do sort of have a deadline of about the end of summer, well, end of August, because I could be leaving then or by the end of the year and going back to Ohio. So if I have to finish in Ohio, that's, you know, if I have to finish this up in Ohio, that's fine. Yeah, my question earlier about knocking out the knowledge test for CFI, I had somebody else recommend doing the advanced ground and the CFI one first, and then doing the fundamentals of instruction. So now I've kind of heard both ways, and I need to think about, I guess I need to think about that a little bit.
One does not depend on the other, so it kind of doesn't matter which order you take those in, but you got to get them both done at some point.
I think that the material for the FOI tends to be a little bit easier to to get through. There's more you have to know for the CFI and the AGI. So just from a knowledge perspective, the FOI is probably the lesser of two evils when it comes to the knowledge test. And
Which you probably
the
find,
commercial done, I think that that's probably the funnest and, quite honestly, easiest rating to accomplish. The secret to getting through the maneuvers for the commercial check ride is every one of them is a patience maneuver. If you try to rush them, you will fail miserably. If you sit back and actually have fun with them, they're a joy to fly, and they're really, really not difficult to do.
if you just finish the commercial knowledge test, the CFI and HGI knowledge test is very, very close to that. So the material's going to be fresh in your brain.
Well, plus I just finished instrument about, well, less than a year ago. I think I did my check ride with John back in June.
I clustered
Very
all
cool.
my written by how similar the questions were going to be. So I did my FOI on one day, and I did flight instructor airplane and AGI on one day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and knocked them all out. It was pretty straightforward doing it that way.
Wow.
Yeah, my thought is,
All right.
my thoughts kind of knock out the knowledge test now, because obviously you're not doing a lot of flying.
Yeah.
I would focus on the knowledge test. Take the opportunity of the downtime that we've had thrust upon us, and get these written tests taken care of. Get the ground review taken care of. If there's and I'll even throw this out there. I'm sure John would agree with it. And based on the response we got Sunday, I think it was, when we first proposed this, I know there's at least a half a dozen instructors and DPEs that are all willing to come online and provide some guidance and discussion for various topics. If there's something during this downtime you'd like to have discussed, maybe we can do a couple of, for lack of a better term, short courses, short topic discussions on something that you find challenging, and we can set those up and people going to the topics they're interested in, perhaps going forward, depending on how long this continues.
And since you have time, always remember the FAA-based documents that govern how we teach and test everything. That's Airplane Flying Handbook, Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, Instrument Flying Handbook, Instrument Procedures Handbook. They're free, downloadable. That's how the FAA governs how we teach and how we evaluate. So you got a couple spare hours, they're good books.
Maybe I'll download those, John, and put them on one of the resources page that we had got out there or something for people to download.
Links. Yep.
The links, right? Well, this has been great. It's been nice to see everybody. Mike, again, thank you for the post yesterday to kind of get this going, or the other day, that is. John Green, John Somiak, thank you all for your input as well. And JP, nice to see you online. Mike, do you have anything else you want to close out with or kind of talk about as far as Thursday?
Thursday night, I think we want to try to focus primarily on instrument instruction, instrument flight and procedures. And obviously, if you're not working on instruments, you're certainly welcome to join us. I'm sure we'll have a good, lively discussion. But we kind of wanted to break it apart, because if the questions tonight turn towards instrument, we felt we might lose some of the student pilots working on basic flying, because we're talking in a different language that they're not used to. But again, we like these open conversations. Thursday, we're going to focus on instrument. And I hope to see a bunch of y'all, if not all of you, Thursday evening. And with a little luck, Tim Fisher will be leading that discussion.
Yeah, he had voted for that Thursday, so I know he should be on that call. So, but very cool. Well, great to see everybody. I'll post what Mark had mentioned as well. once he sends that over. Thank you for everybody who joined on Facebook Live as well. And by the way, for those that did join on Facebook Live via the Zoom link, did that all work out okay on Facebook if you're on there? Because that was a last minute change. Anyways, if not, or send me some feedback on that if it was good. So I will
John,
send out go ahead, JP.
sorry, no, just was going to tell John that I'm getting ready to take my check ride, so I'll probably give you a call for a drone pilot.
You're going to call me?
Yeah. My drone pilot license.
I haven't done any of those.
I hope you have dual controls.
Well, everyone stay tuned for an email later, probably tomorrow, and you'll have the information for another Zoom link, and we'll do the same thing at 7 o'clock on Thursday.
And thanks for the logistical support here, Gabe. You do a remarkable job.
Hey, thanks for that, John. I appreciate it. We'll see everybody on Thursday. Have a good night. Be safe.
Everybody have a good evening. Thanks for participating.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you all. See ya.
Bye-bye.